The Strait of Hormuz is a global concern. In the 21st century, about 20% of the world's oil and natural gas passes through that place, so often surrounded by wars. But what few people know is that 400 years ago, Persians and even the English fought in that strait precisely to try to reduce the Portuguese occupation of the Persian Gulf. That's because the Portuguese had managed years earlier to establish trading posts and outposts not only in Hormuz, but also in Oman and Bahrain, completely dominating that region. But after all, how did Portugal manage to achieve all this? How did it stay dominant for a century? How did it lose this hegemony? How are the English involved? And what role did the Strait of Hormuz play in the Portuguese Empire? In today's video, we'll discuss the Portuguese conquest of Hormuz and how they controlled the Persian Gulf for over a century. To understand why Portugal dominated Hormuz, it's necessary to understand the nature of the Portuguese Empire and the time in which it emerged. Portugal, in the 16th century, had a total population of only 1 million inhabitants. In other words, Portugal had 6 times less population than Castile in England and 12 times less than France. So, with so few human resources, Portugal couldn't dominate many lands. It just needed to control the right lands. In this way, Dom Manuel, advised by Afonso de Albuquerque, designed the Portuguese Empire as a thalassocratic empire. In other words, it would be an empire focused not on dominating lands, but on controlling the ocean and also the trading posts between the oceans, profiting from that. And beyond profit, he saw Portugal's naval superiority as playing a decisive supporting role in the reconquest of the Holy Land. And, as the historian Paulo de Drummond Braga points out in his work, the Portuguese king even sent letters to several leaders of Christendom in 1506 and 1517 to try to convince them to undertake a crusade to Jerusalem. According to the historian, the Portuguese dreamed of attacking Mecca, considered the capital of the infidels, and then the Holy Land, using fleets that would be unstoppable across the Indian Ocean and the Red Sea. And for this mission, he appoints a great commander named Afonso de Albuquerque. Afonso is sent by Dom Manuel to the Indian Ocean, not just to take up a post, but to close off all the passages of that ocean. This included the passage to the Pacific through Malacca, which would be conquered in 1511, but also control of the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, and finally, the Strait of Hormuz. The Persian Gulf was one of the major arteries of world trade, especially on the routes that connected the east to the west. It was there that the markets of Europe and Asia met. Spices from India and Southeast Asia passed through there, as well as porcelain from China, silk from Persia, cotton from Gujarat, and pearls extracted from the Gulf itself. And all of this converged at that same point, the Kingdom of Hormuz. From the islands near Iran and its possessions in Oman, Hormuz controlled the entrance to the Gulf and also dominated the land routes that, coming from Persia and Iraq, headed toward the Mediterranean. And the result was a vibrant and deeply diverse city. Hormuz became a true crossroads of civilizations, a living Babel, as contemporaries used to say. And in its streets there were Persian, Arab, Indian, Turkish, Armenian, Venetian, and Jewish merchants trading day and night. Thus, in 1506, Albuquerque heads towards the Indian Ocean, being appointed as captain of the Arabian coasts and with express orders to close off the Spice Ocean. And he would start precisely with the Persian Gulf. He starts by conquering the island of Socotra. Then he continues besieging several cities along the coast of Oman until he reaches the capital, Muscat, which is bombarded until it surrenders. By this time, the fame of Afonso de Albuquerque had already spread throughout the Persian Gulf region. In Hormuz, there was even a rumor that the Portuguese ate people, such was their ferocity. So when Albuquerque landed in September 1507, the inhabitants tried to intimidate the Portuguese with war drums and a large fleet. But Albuquerque approaches anyway. And the Portuguese commander decides to take the lead and orders a violent bombardment against all the
posições em Hormuz As
During hours of bombardment, the ships were sinking and soldiers were falling, to the despair of everyone watching the battle from the city. And so, in a short time, the young king of Hormuz asked to negotiate. Hormuz, therefore, agrees to submit to Albuquerque, paying tribute and allowing the Portuguese to build a fort, the fort of Our Lady of the Conception of Hormuz. But Albuquerque would soon face a terrible setback. His men had barely crossed half the world and had already conquered islands and some important cities. But instead of being rewarded, they were now suffering, breaking rocks to build a fortress in a desert area. Thus, 3 of his captains deserted, forcing Albuquerque to abandon the project and head to India, where he would become viceroy. And just as the Portuguese wanted to be rewarded after so much effort, you can too, by becoming a member of the channel and getting access to our group and exclusive videos. In India, Albuquerque would conquer Goa in 1510 and Malacca in 1511, and then return to Hormuz to retake it in 1515. The Portuguese had left an unfinished fort in Hormuz. But when they returned to the place, they found chaos had taken over. The former leader had been deposed and power was usurped by a local nobleman. In this way, Afonso de Albuquerque manages to negotiate with the former dynasty to restore power to them in exchange for them becoming vassals under Portugal's protection, which they naturally end up accepting. In this way, Albuquerque consolidates the control of Hormuz in 1515, initiating the Portuguese presence in the Persian Gulf and dominating that important region of the world. The Portuguese finally complete the fortress of Nossa Senhora da Conceição de Hormuz, and they build 2 others in Muscat, marking the Portuguese domination also over Oman and parts of the Arabian Peninsula. But not everyone accepted Portuguese rule in the Gulf. After conquering Hormuz, Mukrim ibn Zamil, ruler of Bahrain, stopped paying tribute to Hormuz and consequently to the Portuguese. Thus, on June 27, 1521, the Portuguese, commanded by Antonio Correa, together with the inhabitants of Hormuz, landed in Bahrain to force Bahrain's vassalage to Hormuz and consequently also to Portugal. And to consolidate the Portuguese presence there, the Portuguese built the Portuguese fort of Khalat al-Bahrain. The Portuguese now controlled the entire Gulf. Hormuz, Muscat, and Bahrain seemed invincible. But empires don't fall overnight. They first collapse from within. And that's what happened with the Iberian Union. The Spanish monarchy, with truly global ambitions, not only attracted all of Castile's enemies to Portugal, but also paid less attention to the Portuguese Empire. That idea of Dom Manuel to dominate the seas by controlling specific points seemed outdated compared to the more modern idea under Philip, which was to dominate land, both continental and overseas. Whether it was through expansions in the heart of the Americas or in the center of Europe with the financing of the religious wars. And at the end of the 16th century, Portuguese hegemony in the Indian Ocean began to come to an end. That's because other European powers started to sail through the Indian Ocean. Since Portugal was now ruled by the Spanish kings, the great enemies of Castile now had the perfect excuse to attack Portugal and seize Portuguese power in the East. And among them, the English East India Company stands out, as they sought direct access to the riches of the East without depending on Portuguese intermediaries. Unlike Portugal, whose imperial structure was already showing signs of wear, the English operated with greater flexibility, better commercial organization, and a growing military capability. While Portugal operated with enormous bureaucracy, which from time to time was still influenced by Madrid, decision-making in the English company was much more technical and decentralized. And although Hormuz brought a lot of money to the Portuguese through customs revenue, there was very little investment in fleet renewal and in improving the fortresses. This happened while the bureaucrats in charge were getting richer and richer by diverting funds from the crown. Unlike the visionary and warrior vigor of Afonso de Albuquerque, Hormuz was increasingly taken over by bureaucrats who aimed to profit from the flow of goods, thinking they would never fall because they had a very good navy. Thus, the Portuguese were weakening more and more without realizing it. While the Catholic monarchy and Philip III were bogged down in religious wars and global problems, the corruption of the bureaucrats in Hormuz went unnoticed. And to make matters worse, in the interior of Persia, a silent transformation was underway. Under the command of Shah Abbas I, the Safavids were undergoing a profound reorganization. The Shah, inspired by Western models, was reforming his army and professionalizing his troops. And unlike the Portuguese, whose strength was beginning to fragment, Abbas was concentrating power, resources, and strategy on a single objective: to regain control of the Persian Gulf. But Persia did not have a navy capable of facing the Portuguese at sea. And it was precisely at sea that the fate of Hormuz would be decided. It was then that the English arrived and met the Persians, and in this way the two found a common goal. The English wanted to break the Portuguese monopoly and access the eastern trade directly. The Persians, on the other hand, sought to expel a foreign power from a region they considered rightfully theirs. And so the Persians and the English formed a powerful alliance to expel the Portuguese. In 1602, the Portuguese lost control of Bahrain. Diplomatic tensions with Persia kept increasing, and the Portuguese were slow to negotiate while watching the Shah grow ever more powerful. The Persians then took Keshem, from where the Portuguese imported fresh water, to Hormuz. And so the only possible source now was the island of Kash, which, despite being an important source of fresh water, the Portuguese, trapped in the lucrative bureaucracy and lacking the visionary spirit of Afonso de Albuquerque, had never bothered to fortify. So in 1621, Portuguese forces faced the English in a naval battle, and shortly after, the Portuguese occupied the island of Kash and began building a fortification in a desperate attempt to strengthen their strategic position at the entrance to the Gulf. However, this decision had the opposite effect to what was expected. That's because the Portuguese exposed themselves more to the Persians. In 1622, a joint offensive was launched. The Safavid forces advanced by land, while the English ships blocked maritime access. Hormuz, which for more than a century had been the symbol of Portuguese power in the east, was now isolated. And with the fall of Kash, the situation became unsustainable. Deprived of water, food, and reinforcements, the Portuguese garrison found itself surrounded on all sides. And so within a few weeks, in the year 1622, the fortress of Hormuz fell. After more than 100 years of rule, the Portuguese were forced to abandon the island and move their operations center to Muscat, on the present-day coast of Oman. But they would never regain control of the strait. The fall of Hormuz was not just the loss of a strategic position. It was a world that was changing. The new balance of power in the Indian Ocean was no longer in Portugal's favor. And the strait, which for decades had been dominated by a small European power, was now passing into other hands. With it, one of the most emblematic chapters of Portuguese expansion in the East ended. Did you know about the Portuguese domination of the Strait of Hormuz? What surprised you the most? So go ahead and leave your comment right now to support our work. And take the opportunity to become a member of the channel right now. That way, you'll have access to exclusive content so you can not only support our work, but also dive deeper and learn even more about the fascinating Iberian history.